I'm Dr. Sean Malarvey, author of The Fat Thief. This is the first of 3 videos. This video represents a thematic aspect of the first and the primary section of my book. I've struggled with obesity most of my life until I was able to distill the problem down to 3 key concepts. But this has taken me a lifetime, and I'm trying to convey these same 3 concepts to you with a 170-page book, a website portal, a social support type mechanism, and a few short videos. I think of these concepts as arguments I'm making to you. They are arguments for truth, for reality, and for belief. I think of them as arrows for the slaying of dragons. And this short video represents the arrow of truth. I want this to be easy, so I'm just going to tell a story about the molecule that saved humanity. It was a dark and stormy night, 3.5 billion years ago, somewhere over the singular continent of Pangaea, on the 3rd planet from a sun much like many others, a pale blue dot in the vastness of space. It was a beautiful world of blue, with rich soil and sand and stone, but does beauty even exist if there are none there to see it? Nonetheless, science tells us that there was a primordial soup of water and nutrients and heavy elements from distant stars that had rained down on the surface of this blue planet over the preceding 9 billion years. And carbon. There was a lot of carbon. Where was I? Oh yes, it was a dark and stormy night, and with a flash of electricity, everything changed. Suddenly, where there had been nothing, now there was something. Somehow, and no one really knows how, small molecules made of hydrogen and carbon and nitrogen and oxygen spontaneously self-assembled into a bigger molecule, a short strand of RNA, the precursor to DNA. But not only that, it happened to self-assemble inside the protective wall of a cell. And well, it began. Life began. Science tells us that another billion years pass, and this one cell divided again and again. 1 became 2, became 4, became 8, became, well, eventual numbers and organisms too numerous to count. And this happened because this molecule of RNA that became DNA was busy. It learned from the environment and it changed bit by bit over the course of millennia. Now, you need to understand, DNA is information. It's like a code for the cells. It only has 4 keys, 4 nucleotide-based pairs. But when you have molecular strands of millions of nucleotide-based pairs long, that's a lot of code. For example, the DNA in your body contains enough base pairs of code, all coiled tightly together inside the microscopic arms of your 46 chromosomes that have stretched out straight and placed end to end, will be long enough to travel the length of the solar system twice. Another 3 billion years pass. This brings us to about 200 million years ago. And from the ancient primordial soup arose our most ancient of ancient ancestors, the first mammal, a morganucoodontid. It was more or less a rat. It stood about 2 feet tall. But inside of every nucleus of every cell in that rat's body, there was DNA, reams of it, lines and lines of code. And in the red blood of that first mammal, there was something special. There was the product of one small, itsy-bitsy portion of the code. It was called insulin. And this is its story. That small portion of DNA mutated and changed through untold generations of little prior baby morganuccoodontids until the code for insulin was perfected, until one day, with the latest iteration of insulin, one lucky little rat actually lived more than a few days. And that rat had babies. And they lived too. They lived because of insulin. And what did insulin do that was so special? Well, insulin made fat. That's what was so special. And what was so special about fat? Fat meant life. Fat meant energy. And more specifically, fat meant energy not for now, but for later. Fat meant that the morganuccoodontid wouldn't starve to death after only a few days of a hard, hungry life, like all of its unfortunate predecessors, those failed mutational efforts of the hard-working DNA. No, fat meant that the organism would live, that the organism would in fact survive several days, weeks even, before the next meal. You see, from the perspective of the DNA, fat was beautiful, very beautiful indeed. The truth is, it was. It was beautifully brilliant because about 100 million years later, the world ended. Well, not exactly, but the world ended for most of the life on Earth, including the dinosaurs. Science attributes this mass extinction event to an asteroid strike over the Yucatan Peninsula. It precipitated a nuclear winter from the release of more than 1 billion times the energy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And through all that time, the Morganuccodontid was actually one of the few strains of life that lived. Somehow, it managed to find just enough fruit or berries or grass or ancient grains or bugs, probably mostly bugs. And it would eat those things. And the carbohydrate, which is only sugar, and the protein in that food caused insulin to be released into the bloodstream. And then the insulin would turn all the sugar and the leftover protein into stored energy. It would fill up the glycogen stores first, which really aren't that big, and it would turn everything else into fat, so it could live until the next meal, whether that be hours or days hence. And it lived. And many generations later, its great-great-great-grandchildren lived to see the sun come out from behind the clouds of dust and ash that had been overhead for more than a year. Another 100 million years pass. There are thousands of mammals now. They all have insulin in their bloodstreams, a better, more refined insulin than was in the blood of that first mammal, the Morganuccodontid. And one of those evolutionary strains of all those mammals, now 3 billion years removed from the primordial soup, was smarter than all the rest. Evidence of this was found in a fossilized skeleton dug out of the ground in Ethiopia. They called her Ardipithecus cadava. 3 million years later, her descendants began using stone tools. And this brings us to roughly 2 million years ago. Now, not much has changed since that time, some fraction of a minute on the cosmic time scale, other than, we've gotten less hairy and smarter. And more importantly, sugar is pretty much in everything we eat. The insulin is nearly exactly, if not exactly the same, and our DNA, your DNA, still thinks fat is beautiful. That is our blessing and our curse. That is what you must understand. These are what the biological truths that I describe in my book tells us. You eat carbohydrates, you eat protein. The beta cells of your pancreas release insulin into your bloodstream, and the insulin does what it was made to do. Insulin does what it's been doing for 200 million years. It makes fat, and you live to see another day. So this is the story of insulin, an accidental evolutionary result of 4 billion years of environmental action on microscopic bits of carbon within the primordial soup. This is what science tells us. But some do suggest an alternative explanation, and that simply is that in the beginning, there was darkness. And then God said, "Let there be light." All you need to know about the 7 biological truths is clearly explained in my book, and with specific, flexible steps to be taken. FatThief.com is the gateway to all the information I am presenting to you. There are no fees. There are no barriers other than inaction. Thank you.